Greetings, dear friends, and welcome to another installment of the Difficult Scriptures Finally Explained. We come now to Genesis chapter 4 and verse 5. It's probably one of the most misunderstood scriptures out there in the Bible. Genesis chapter 4 verse 5, it says, "But to Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell." Now many do not understand why God rejected Cain's offering. What was there about Cain's offering that made it unaccountable to God? Was it the offering itself, or was it Cain's attitude? It would appear that Cain was at fault both in his attitude and in the offering he presented to the Lord. Now Cain's attitude and approach to life was not right with God. In Genesis chapter 4 and verse 7, we read, God tells Cain, "If you do well, shall you not be accepted? And if you do not well, sin lies at the door." Now that's the crux of the matter. Sin lies at the door. Cain was living a sinful life, and he knew it. So Cain's sacrifice consisted of crops he had raised in his garden. That's what it says in Genesis chapter 4 and verse 3, rather than a blood sacrifice. You see, he didn't give blood sacrifice to the Lord, as his younger brother Abel had set before the Lord. Because Cain was in a rebellious state of mind, God would not have accepted his sacrifice even if he had offered an animal. Because in Proverbs chapter 15 verse 8 we see that it says, "The sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but the prayer of the upright is his delight." What was the difference between Cain and Abel? Well, the Abel presented a blood sacrifice and did so in faith, as it says in Hebrews chapter 11 verse 4. So the fact that he presented a blood sacrifice and did so in faith strongly suggests that he was claiming a divine promise of grace as he laid lamb on the altar. That was a promise he had learned from his parents. Abel was upright in heart. He was a man of faith, as it says in Hebrews chapter 11 verse 4. And God therefore was pleased with Abel's offering, as it says in Genesis chapter 4 verse 4, and responding to him with approval, in contrast with God's rejection of Cain's offering. It would seem that Cain had followed his own judgment in choosing a bloodless sacrifice, disregarding the importance of blood as explained by God to Adam and Eve, and disregarding the principle of substitution of offerings. Cain rejected God and his instructions and led an evil life. Let us notice in 1 John chapter 3 and verse 12, that's what it says about Cain. It says, "Not as Cain, who was of that wicked one, and slew his brother. And wherefore slew he him? Because his works were evil, and his brother's righteous." So Cain's willful substitution of the work of his own hands was followed by a savage jealousy and burning resentment towards his younger brother, as it is recorded in Genesis chapter 4 and verse 5. Eventually, this led to the murder of Abel in the field, where Cain assumed that no one will see him. His proud self-will led him to commit homicide, and his descendants carried on something of his man-centered, God-denying attitude for many generations to come until the flood. God admonished Cain to overcome the sin which permeated his life, as we have read in Genesis chapter 4 verse 7. However, Cain did not heed this admonition, and his way of life went from bad to worse. He ultimately murdered his brother Abel and founded a society which completely rejected God and his laws. Mankind in general has followed in Cain's footsteps ever since.